So much of this was driven by the war on drugs. And boy, if there's ever been a war that was a failure, it was the war on drugs. I mean, so much carnage and so much uh, undercutting of our liberties to accomplish like what? We have not really succeeded in much of anything. And it's, yeah, I mean, I think we were sharing the same reaction here, which is, you think about a SWAT team bursting into somebody's home and you think, whoa, wait a minute, excuse me. This is like the United States of America. This is domestic policing. This is what it looks like.
Welcome to episode 69 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features Barry Friedman, a constitutional law professor at NYU who is the founder and faculty director of the Policing Project, which partners with communities and police to promote public safety through transparency, equity, and democratic engagement. Barry is the author of critically acclaimed The Will of the People: How Public Opinion Has Influenced the Supreme Court and Shaped the Meaning of the Constitution, and Unwarranted, Policing Without Permission, among other publications. He appears frequently in the popular media, including the New York Times, Slate, Huffington Post, Political, The New Republic, and more. Barry and I discuss his career journey, his experience on 9/11 and how it changed his perspective, the Supreme Court, front-end accountability for police and the role every citizen can play in it, alternative response initiatives, how entertainment can normalize issues, and much more. Here is Barry Friedman on People Are the Answer. Barry, thank you so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
It's my pleasure. It's fun to be here.
I'm fascinated by your work, excited to dig into it. If you could start off by telling our listeners who you are, where you're based, and what your current role is.
Sure. I'm Barry Friedman, and I am a law professor at NYU School of Law. Formerly, I am the Jacob D. Fuchsberg Professor of Law. I'm an affiliated professor of politics, and probably most relevant for our conversation, I am also the faculty director of the Policing Project, and I am based in New York City.
And in life in general, what would you say motivates you?
So many things motivate me, but obviously for the things we're going to talk about, a lot of that is social justice. I'm incredibly concerned that we have a society that works for everybody in the society, and I feel pretty strongly that we all ought to do what part we can to make that be the case.
I can definitely appreciate that. And, one thing that I love to ask people that are innovating in impact is, where they grew up and what it was like there.
I was alerted to this question, and I'm going to disappoint you. So I grew up in Rockville, Maryland. I didn't love the suburbs very much, and I'm glad not to be living in them now. And there was nothing about that I think motivated what I do today. My dad was an auditor with the federal government, and ultimately a part of an inspector general's office. He retired as a deputy inspector general, and I think he had a real nose for wrongdoing, for things that seemed off, for corruption. And I'm sure you've had this experience as you get older, you're more your parents. And I find that I'm more and more my dad in that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And we definitely, I feel like, tend to emulate our parents for better or worse. And, so it sounds like maybe your dad or your family in general were sort of your first experiences of seeing people sort of give back to society.
Probably, but I've thought about this question a lot, and I actually, so I don't know where who I am comes from precisely. I mean, it's obviously a large part our parents. Um, I think maybe my early years as a lawyer influenced me also. Just some of the lawyers that I worked with who were, very socially conscious. I clerked for a federal judge was the third woman on the United States Court of Appeals, and her family before her father was very involved in social justice causes in the South. I went and taught for a year at the University of Alabama for kind of random reasons, but I worked with a wonderful lawyer who's since passed away, Ralph Knowles, and he was very involved in social change. I went to Davis Polk as a lawyer, and the firm had a real commitment to pro bono work, and I did a bunch there. And so I think my early years as a lawyer really trained me in part to believe that that's what we're supposed to do. Part of it just comes from my heart. I feel very lucky to both have what I have in this world, but also, as I tell people, I feel lucky to get to do this work. To be able to do something meaningful is pretty special.
Yeah, it's great to have meaning in your work, and certainly helps the late nights be a little bit easier. And I saw that you went to University of Chicago, and what led you there from Maryland?
I knew we were going to not be able to hedge around this, so I'm going to just dig right in. So I was, I guess the polite way to say this is I was asked to leave high school uh, during my junior year uh, for a variety of reasons. And that was, my parents were not very sophisticated in many ways and didn't really know what to do with that and what to do with me. And as it happened, I had attended a college fair, not many because it was still my junior year, but I met a woman from the University of Chicago. And so I called her up. And the University of Chicago, I then learned, had a tradition of taking people kind of early into the college. And I applied and they admitted me and I went. So I got there. I got in a pickup, what do you call it, a U-Haul van with a couple other guys and got there. I'd never seen the campus. My daughter's there now, and so I chuckle about this. And it's a very imposing campus. And I remember the first session we had in Rockefeller Chapel where the faculty all came in their robes and there were heralds blaring. And I remember thinking, "Woo, I am a long way from Rockville, Maryland here." And I really, felt lucky that that happened in my life. And the University of Chicago remains an incredibly special place to me.
And I think the interesting part at the beginning, that you were asked to leave high school, I don't think that's necessarily anything to be ashamed of. I think a lot of people have different paths to where they get, and it led you to where you are today. So it's cool to hear that.
Yep, it worked out okay, I guess, but it was stressful for a little while.
So how was your time at University of Chicago, and then what led you to go to law school?
So I always knew I was going to go to law school since I was like in second grade. I decided I was going to be a lawyer. I always thought I'd go into government, and that's the really interesting thing, which is that I never did. I've contemplated it here and there, but I mostly haven't. In the more recent years, when I think it would have been easier for me to go into government, I concluded that maybe I could have more impact outside, and I think I've been lucky to be able to do some of that. Um, so I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, and that kind of made you pre-law. Uh, and then actually, uh, I I left college a year early, which was really silly. I regret that to this day because it was such a great place. I would have enjoyed it, but I'd actually had a friend who wanted to go backpacking in Europe, and I got all excited about the idea. So I graduated and went to Europe, and came back and started to work as a computer programmer. The only thing that the University of Chicago taught me that made me sort of job worthy right away was how to program in COBOL and Fortran. And so I got a job doing that. And right before I started law school, I started to get offers to, move to bigger places, kind of more corporate. I was working at the little consulting firm, and I was tempted for a bit. And it is interesting because, that was 1979. So if I'd gotten into the computer world in 1979, I might be really rich right now. Uh, but I decided, and I hesitated because I really love computers and programming. But I decided to go on to law school, and there I was in law school.
Well, I'm glad that you made that decision. I think your work's very important, despite those millions you may have missed out on through missing out on some of that the tech bubble. But you took the plunge. You went to Georgetown for law school. Graduated magna cum laude. And what was your next step from there?
So, you know, you're taking me through this, and it makes me think about life lessons. And one of my life lessons is that so many things that have happened in my life didn't happen in a kind of pre-programmed or linear fashion. I went and clerked for this judge, and then a woman I was dating uh, got a job working for a very, very famous civil rights judge in Montgomery, Alabama, Frank Johnson. Frank Johnson had handled a lot of the desegregation cases during the civil rights era. And I thought, what am I going to do in Alabama for a year? Particularly because I wasn't so eager to take another bar exam. They're not that much fun. And I was interviewing for jobs. In fact, I think I'd gotten an offer at the Southern Poverty Law Center And out of the blue, somebody said to me, the University of Alabama is looking for a constitutional law professor, just to, like, they had a vacancy all of a sudden, and they needed somebody kind of for a year, which is common now, but was not common then at all. And I interviewed, I got the job, and I went and taught at the university as a law professor for a year. And Jeff, the thing is, which is so crazy about life, if I hadn't done that, I'd have never become a law professor. It was total fortuity, and I loved it. And I then went on to practice law for a couple of years at Davis Polk, and then I taught as an adjunct at Georgetown, and then I went on the law teaching market and ended up at Vanderbilt. But isn't it nuts? I mean, I don't know if you have a similar story in your life at all, but I just, this, like, there have been any number of stories like this in mine, but that one in particular, where the thing that I'm so passionate about doing and love doing, I don't know if I'd ever done it if it wasn't just for that string of events.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, life has a tendency to lead you in a certain direction, and it's exciting to hear how that came about and really, led you to your career. And you mentioned, ending up at Vanderbilt, and I know you've been at NYU since '99. What stops did you have before NYU?
So I went to Davis Polk after my time at the University of Alabama. I practiced law for a couple of years, taught as an adjunct, went on the law teaching market and got a job at Vanderbilt and went. I was there for, I guess, 14 years. So, Nashville's a really great place, though it looks much different now than it looked when I was there. I did a bunch of other stuff when I was there. I was the president of the Tennessee affiliate of the ACLU, did a bunch of litigation. And then I got a phone call one day from a woman who's now a friend of mine on the faculty at NYU. And she said, we really need somebody to come teach federal jurisdiction in the spring. Do you want to do it? But there's no job in it for you. She was very clear about that. Like, this is a come fill in for a semester. And I said, great. I don't know that I even like living in New York. I don't need the stress of a job hunt. But I'm happy to, like, come hang out in Greenwich Village. And I went, and I had so much fun. I just fell in love with the city, with the school. And then, of course, I had to go home because they'd made clear that there was no job. And so I went back to Nashville, which was a lovely place, but I was kind of disappointed. And that fall, John Sexton, who was then the dean and became the president of the university and is kind of a larger than life figure, called me up and said, we think we want you back. And so I went back, and, I've been at NYU ever since. And it's just been a remarkable place. It's a school that is so exciting. I can't, it feels like it's bursting at the seams all the time. And there's so much going on, and there's so much opportunity. The one thing you never are at NYU is bored. And so here I am.
Yeah, wow. I mean, to go somewhere and really find the place that's sort of meant for you and stick around, that's got to feel good. And I'm sure you feel very much at home there.
I really love it. And, this is a thing in academia. You may or may not know this, but everybody who's in the academy spends their time thinking about where else they'd like to be in the academy. I always explain it's a very simple graph. It's like on one axis you have the school, and on the other axis you have the geography, where you would live, and you kind of try to maximize your utility there. And then you wait for somebody to knock on your door who might want you to go to that place. And it is an amazing feeling, as you just said, to just know that you're somewhere that, like, you're perfectly happy. When I got the full-time job there, I had to pinch myself, and I suppose I've never quite stopped pinching myself.
What a beautiful connection to have with the role and with the place. And so I think that it is especially helpful, I'm sure, for your work to love where you are. And one thing I wanted to bring up is relatively early on in your time at NYU was 9/11, and I'm curious how that impacted your life and moving forward.
I think you probably don't know what I'm about to tell you, but I was very impacted by 9/11. It's actually what led me into my policing work and led me to write my book Unwarranted. So, I can recount for you every minute of that day. In fact, I was supposed to go that morning with John Sexton's wife to look at engagement rings in the Diamond District, and that never happened. And I remember, running around the city looking for my father-in-law who had been down around the World Trade Center at that time. I remember the smell. I mean, I just remember everything from the days that followed. It was pretty profound to be here. I remember standing on Christopher Street and cheering the first responders. But a really odd thing happened shortly thereafter. So two things. First, people would talk about how we really needed to crack down in certain ways in terms of law enforcement. And I would have conversations with them and say, just give me an idea of what you think it is that the police can't do that they need to be able to do. Because I teach criminal procedure, and I'm here to tell you the Supreme Court has pretty much not limited the police at all, and in fact has given them far too much leeway, and not for the good of the police or society. I think that the courts have made an absolute mess of policing in this country. And people would tell me things, and I would say, well, they can do that. They've been allowed to do that forever. And then people would be like, really? I realized people had no idea. And then shortly thereafter, we broke ground on a building, which is Furman Hall, named after Jay Furman, an alum who passed away a few years ago. And I actually teach it. I run a program in his name to train people to be young academics. And Sandra Day O'Connor came to the groundbreaking. And she gave a talk in which she said, we're really going to have to give up some of our liberties now. And I thought that was an incredible thing. I'm a huge Sandra Day O'Connor fan. I should make clear, I have a mug on my shelf at my office that says I heart Sandra Day O'Connor. And I have a funny story I could tell you about her one day. But I was shocked. I mean, the idea that a sitting Supreme Court justice should say we have to kind of reconsider our liberties, and that that experience and what I told you is really what led me to think I wanted to write about policing, which I had taught for years but never written about. My early work had been about the Supreme Court, the courts, and so it was 9/11 affected my career very much. But being in New York at that time, I don't know where you were. Where were you on 9/11? I
was in Charleston, South Carolina, where I grew up. I was in 8th grade, and we finished watching a movie in my science class or some video of some sort, and the news was on, and so we saw that the first plane had hit, and then in the next class we were in, we watched the second one, unfortunately.
Wow, that must have been crazy. You've also made me feel old. I just want to.
Yeah, I figured that when I saw it. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was tremendously impactful for so many people. But I think, it sounds like you pretty profoundly being in New York and then seeing this message from Sandra Day O'Connor on liberty. And, I certainly see how that got you interested in some of those stuff you work on with policing. But you mentioned prior to that, really focusing your work on the Supreme Court. And in 2009, you released the book, The Will of the People, How Public Opinion Has Influenced the Supreme Court and Shaped the Meaning of the Constitution.
I did. I'm looking to see if I have a copy of it right here. I'm going to just do a little promo of the book.
Yeah, no, please.
No, there it is. Actually, what I want to make clear is that it's very fat.
So yeah, you talked about, early on writing about the Supreme Court, what sort of led to the making of this book, and, tell me some more about it.
So, my early area was, I'm a constitutional law professor is what I am. And my early writing as a young scholar was about the courts. And there's this problem that is central to how we think about the courts, which has a very ugly name, the counter-majoritarian difficulty. But there's a meaning to that, which is counter-majoritarian, meaning that the Supreme Court, what it does often takes apart or undoes what majorities wanted. So when the Supreme Court strikes down a statute that was passed by majorities, you think, okay, so they're thwarting the will of the people. That's why my book's called The Will of the People. And that's just taken for granted in law, and everybody tries to explain then why it's okay to have courts that can, strike down statutes that reflect the will of the majority. And I went through my early career, and the thing was I didn't understand why anybody thought that the courts were interfering with the will of the majority. They seemed to be just following along with the will of the majority on just about everything I could see, whether it was abortion or capital punishment or sort of any salient issue in society. And so I wrote some articles on the subject, and then I got curious about where this idea about this counter-majoritarian problem came from. And I ended up researching the history of the Supreme Court and its relationship to public opinion from 1776 or earlier all the way to 2005, which was when Sandra Day O'Connor left the Supreme Court and Chief Justice William Rehnquist died, and we got Chief Justice John Roberts and Samuel Alito. But that was kind of where my book was ending. The thesis of the book, which I don't know if it's true anymore, to be honest, was that the court tends to stay in line with public opinion. It may get a little ahead of it, it may get behind it, but it doesn't get too far out of line. And I had a number of reasons why that might be true, but the primary one was that the Congress, the political branches, but primarily the Congress, have the ability to discipline the Supreme Court if it behaves badly. And they know that. And in fact, they've been disciplined a lot over the course of history. There have been some, incidents that maybe everybody doesn't know about, but that where, their jurisdiction's been taken from them. We've had the court packed. Justices have been impeached, but not removed. And so that's what I wrote about. And I'm not as sure it's true today. And I think the reason it may not be true today is that there's no, at least under the political configuration that we have now, there's no realistic possibility of Congress disciplining the Supreme Court in a serious way. And so I think they feel free to do whatever the heck they want. But I will just say, and then I'll shut up, that I did read about recently a bill that somebody's proposing. I don't know that it has any chance of getting passed, but that would take, I think, $10 million out of the Supreme Court's budget unless they pass an ethics bill for themselves. And so that is the kind of thing Congress can do if it wants to do. Just, whether you can get the votes to do it is a different question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting idea to consider. And, we mentioned you wrote this book in 2009, and the Supreme Court is obviously very much a timely topic, as it always is, but especially right now when we're dealing with the makeup of it and all the various things that are coming down. And like you said, you're sort of starting to see the unraveling of that thesis. So what is sort of your take on where the Supreme Court is today, and what we need to do to get to a place where it is what it needs to be?
So people have different views about that. There are some people who are thrilled about the Supreme Court. In fact, I think it's pretty clear that the reason that we had Donald Trump as president of the United States was because some people felt that would give them the courts that they wanted, and it did. That the one thing that certainly the Trump administration delivered on was the judiciary. And I'm not sure that was a good trade, but I hope that those folks are, like Mitch McConnell, are happy with the trade that they made. The court on many issues does still stay relatively in line with public opinion, but there are a few screamers. I think none more than abortion right now. I mean, it is really remarkable for the court for an issue that's not a First Amendment issue. It turns out that on First Amendment issues, the court tends to kind of be on less of a tether in terms of public opinion. But certainly the Dobbs decision is one in which the court is just way out of line with public opinion. And they don't care. That's why they were put there. And, we will see where this ultimately goes. I don't know. I just published an article with a colleague of mine and then another one by myself in academic journals that I promise don't want to read, but trying to guess, the future with the Supreme Court, like what's going to happen. And it's either things will keep chugging along like they are, or they will get so out of line with public opinion that they get snapped back, but that doesn't seem likely right now. I do think we have a crisis in that this court is kind of unraveling the Constitution in the following sense. Our Constitution is really old. And I mean, I know people venerate the Constitution and we have this thing in our hearts, but if you just sat down practically and, forgot all the veneration and just said, what would be the chance that a document written in 1787 would work to run things here in 2023? I mean, pick three things that they'd never, electricity, even though Ben Franklin did have the Kait thing going, and telecommunications and nuclear weapons, and we could just go down the list, AI, what's the chance that that document would still be working? And you would say very little. And the way that it's kept working is that the Supreme Court has kind of let the cord out on things, let things change and evolve over time so that we could, keep up with the times. And to the extent that the court was doing that, things worked tolerably well. We have a court that I think, as you know, is now very much yanking back from that. Everything is no good unless that was what it was in 1787. And I probably shouldn't say this because somebody will steal my title, but I want to write an article sometime called "The Court That Killed the Constitution," because I think this court might kill the Constitution in the sense that we have to have another constitutional convention and figure out what the rules are going to be because they're making this Constitution unworkable.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting perspective in terms of the Constitution and how it can continue to apply. Yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes from here. And, in terms of some of the strategies to combat the current issues, I'm curious what you think, with some people trying to pack the Supreme Court and other strategies, where are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, there are some reforms that are needed for the Supreme Court. One is around ethics. Another is the fact that we have this odd accident about when we get vacancies on the Supreme Court. And it's not been so accidental in recent years. If you're a Republican appointed justice, you wait until there's a solid Republican in the White House who can muster congressional majorities to fill your seat. But there's also a set of sort of accidents or happenstance. And because of that happenstance, it is just a fact that even though that the Republicans have wildly disproportionately gotten to fill seats on the Supreme Court, out of proportion to how many years that they've held the White House. And that's, partly just accident, like Justice Scalia drops dead or Ruth Bader Ginsburg drops dead. And it's partly, some knavery. I really have nothing good to say about Mitch McConnell's withholding Antonin Scalia's seat and then filling Ruth Bader Ginsburg's instantly. But I think almost everyone I know who's thoughtful on both sides of the ideological spectrum, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, think we need to do something to even that out. Like it would just be a better system if vacancies came regularly. And so I think that's another reform that's needed. A lot of that other stuff like packing the court, the real value of that is it just gets the Supreme Court to pay attention to the fact that things can happen to them and therefore they need to, again, nobody's asking that judges not be independent. It's just that there's a limit. Like how far out of tune are you going to get? And that's the problem.
Yeah, certainly a difficult problem to solve. There's a lot of opportunities, and I think some of those reforms will be difficult to push through, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're hopeful. I'm not. I feel like I'm a real buzzkill. I know we're going to talk about policing next, and it's not going to get any better. So you might have wished that you'd invited somebody to come talk to you who's a little more optimistic on some of this.
Yeah, I think regardless of where you think it's going, the fact that you and your team and the people that you work with are putting in the effort to try to push us in the right direction and at least try to sort of show the world what the direction could be via your work. I think that's going to go a long way. And it's because of work like that, the work of a lot of people out there, that I try to have some hope.
Yeah, I'm not without hope. It's just that, you always say the arc of history bends toward justice, but sometimes I feel like it bends very slowly, and with many bumps along the way. And so, but obviously I keep doing the work. So
yeah, I do think we're in a bumpy moment right now, but we'll make it over.
I'll hope.
So you mentioned earlier, that change around 9/11 and how that really got you to focus more closely on policing and our liberties. And then I saw that you became a reporter for Principles of Law, Policing, the American Law Institute. Can you tell me about that and sort of how your perspective on policing has evolved over the years?
Yes. I'm going to tell you about why I wrote the book I did and then the birth of the policing project. And that will lead me into the ALI principles. So like I told you, I taught criminal procedure, which is the constitutional law of how, the police should be governed for years. And I never wrote about the police. I think I wrote maybe one little thing, but that was it. And then in 2006, this light bulb went off over my head. And remember, I told you I wanted to write about the police starting in 9/11, but I didn't know what to say. And then I had again, this is this whole thing we were talking about funny fate. I was assigned in one semester to teach constitutional law and criminal procedure, which, I taught frequently, but never together. And so I'm teaching them both. Constitutional law is how the Constitution governs government, and criminal procedures about how the Constitution governs policing, a part of government. And I started to scratch my head because I'd, kind of go from one class to the other. And I started to think, why are the constitutional rules all different for the police than everybody else? That's so weird. Same justices, same constitution, same, in theory, way of interpreting it. And the difference that I noticed was this. And I called this democratic policing, but now the policing project that I started in 2014, we refer to this as front end and back end accountability. So you hear people talk about accountability all the time around government. I'm sure you do. And when we talk about accountability with the police, what everybody means is what we call back end accountability, which is something's gone wrong and somebody wants to investigate it and hold somebody accountable. Whether you want to have a criminal proceeding against a cop or a civil rights action or the federal government investigate, civil review boards, federal monitors, consent decrees, or even if you think about it, body cameras. They're all ways of trying to figure out what went wrong and punish somebody. But in the rest of government, that's not what accountability means at all. In the rest of government, accountability means that we pass rules and statutes on the front end that tell the people that work for us how we want them to behave. And I started to wonder, why don't we do that with the police? That's so weird. In part because if you think about it, the back end punishment thing doesn't work very well if you don't have a clear front end, right? It's hard to hold people accountable if you haven't said what they're accountable for. And I got fascinated by that. I wrote my book Unwarranted. Policing Without Permission is the subtitle. That's the idea, because we haven't, given police permission to do things. Started the policing project. And then my then former dean and friend, Ricky Revesz, asked me to run this project for the American Law Institute to write principles that could be used to govern policing. And that's how I came to do that job.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think what you've been creating with the policing project is pretty remarkable. And I'd love if you could just give sort of a basic overview for our listeners as to what the policing project is.
Sure. So we're a not-for-profit center at New York University School of Law. We're housed here. And we initially focused on exactly what I told you, which is just how to bring front-end accountability to policing. And, just the other day, I was listening to something and somebody used the word front-end accountability, and I smiled because, and with no attribution, but I like that even better, right? Because if you manage to get an idea out into the world that people are talking about, that just, that feels really rewarding. And on the front-end accountability side of the ledger, I'll tell you some of the things we do, but we have a whole other side of us now that's all about, so the way I think about it is, which is all about alternative response, about how to answer 911 calls and deal with societal problems without the police. And so the way I think about our work now is half of our work is about how to try to respond to the needs of people in communities without the police. And the other half is how do you give instruction on what you want to have when the police are dealing with things. And those are the two halves of our work.
So I'm excited to dig into both halves of your work, but let's start off by talking about your book that you mentioned from 2017, Unwarranted, Policing Without Permission. I actually just finished it pretty recently. Got it right here. So definitely worth checking out. I mean, it really is fascinating. I'd say the most sort of takeaway that hit me the hardest is just how much rampant injustice is out there with policing versus average citizens. It is alarming and sad and heartbreaking. It's just so much emotion for me around that.
Yeah, no, it's, as I'm grateful to you for reading the book. I always feel like the books are, I try to write in a voice that would be accessible to everybody and enjoyable to everybody, but I know sometimes they can be long. My next book's going to be shorter and crisper. But I start every chapter, as with some horrific story. And I I started to work with my research assistants to find those stories, but then after you get started, they just like keep tumbling out. As you know, not only are there some terrible things that go wrong, and go wrong to really everybody in society. I try hard in those stories to point out that nobody is completely safe from the things that are wrong in policing, but they also fall most heavily on racial minorities in this country. A lot of my work is centered on trying to address that. But you are right. It is really. Just to give you an example, you could give me one. We could trade examples. But this notion that like we use SWAT teams so much in this country, and they just burst into people's homes. And I tell a story about where they like oops burst into the mayor's house and killed his dogs. But whenever they do that, they leave like destruction in their wake, both psychological destruction, but the doors are burst down, things are off their hinges, and nobody pays for that.
That particular story is the one that probably hit me the hardest. Just to imagine just being in your home, living your life, all of a sudden, because of an address that was put on a package, you have a SWAT team bursting into your home, scaring the crap out of you, killing your pets. I mean, just that one thing happening in itself, your pet getting murdered, would be traumatic. But through this whole experience, and someone's naked and they're not letting them put clothes on, and just like those little things are like such unnecessary trauma that we're putting citizens through. Even if those had been the person that, or even if those had been the people that were supposed to receive this box with marijuana in it, like to do that to them is just really frightening. And yeah, how did we get to this place where we overutilize SWAT teams, where the police has become so militaristic?
So, my next book, I think, I'm just starting to think through it, really wants to be about why we're so bad as a society at keeping ourselves safe. Whether it's 9/11 or whether it's January 6th or whether it's, the kinds of things you're talking about now. And I want to explore that. And I want to explore the kind of heuristic, how we understand the world, the things that lead to that. And one of them is this just ridiculous blind faith in the police that they know what they're doing and we should just leave them alone to do it. And, there are very few things like I'm a lawyer, there's accountability for me. I'm sure there's accountability in your life. And nothing really works without accountability. And certainly government doesn't work without accountability. And yet we refuse to bring it. Politicians feel like they're going to get in trouble if they say something bad about the police. Lots of my friends are police. I have huge respect for people that do that job. It's a hard job, but I'm still going to be the first one in line to be critical of the institution where it needs to have criticism. And I think that's, we haven't. And so, anyway, that's how this kind of situation, like, the government has leftover stuff because we have a war in Iraq. We got all this militarized equipment, got to do something with it. Let's give it to the police. They're happy to have it. The next thing we know, we have police walking around looking like soldiers and bursting into people's homes like soldiers. It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. I know you said in the book, and maybe the number is up by now, even 50,000 of these raids at homes per year, which is just really crazy. And to think about, what so many people have been put through for that. And like, you can't blame the individuals that are doing it. They're doing their job, but it just really makes you think. And for anybody out there who just kind of leaves this stuff out of their mind, it's like, well, it could come to your doorstep without you even expecting it one day.
Well, this relates to your own work, Jeff, which is, so much of this was driven by the war on drugs. And if there's ever been a war that was a failure, it was the war on drugs. So much carnage and so much undercutting of our liberties to accomplish like what? We have not really succeeded in much of anything. And it's, yeah, I think we were sharing the same reaction here, which is, you think about a SWAT team bursting into somebody's home and you think, whoa, wait a minute, excuse me. This is like the United States of America. This is domestic policing. This is what it looks like.
Yeah. And just like the name of your book, so much of it is unwarranted. And just to hear the many stories of the searches that were going on and the breaking in and thinking, the police thinking, well, as long as I catch the bad guy, the judges will let this go. And that was one of the biggest problems you mentioned in the judges trying to have some accountability for the police is, they tend to take it more on a case by case basis than they should, instead of just the underlying philosophy of what we're promised in the Constitution.
Yeah. So, one of the things the Policing Project does is it writes statutes based largely, by the way, on those ALI principles to govern policing, because that's what's missing. And, after George Floyd was murdered, more jurisdictions started to think about like no-knock warrants, how Breonna Taylor was killed, or chokeholds, how George Floyd was killed, a version of. And we write statutes, but the problem is the states started to do this, but it was incredibly piecemeal. We're trying to write comprehensive statutes that would govern policing. And one of them that we're working on right now is SWAT, and what to do about SWAT, because SWAT is completely unregulated in most places. There are often not rules for training, for what munitions can be used, for when the teams can be called out. And, as you know from the book, a lot of the use of SWAT is just to enforce drug warrants. Like, police departments decided, well, if there's drugs, there could be a gun, and so we need a SWAT team. I don't know whatever happened to the old, when I was young, we watched movies where they'd go, come out with your hands up. But I guess we don't do that anymore. And, there's a lot of carnage. I mean, Radley Balco, who's a really amazing guy in Nashville, has written a lot about this topic. And he was the first one that really opened my eyes to it.
Yeah. It's, when I think about it, it was just almost overwhelming to just think more deeply about the mess of the entire system. If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. One thing you mentioned that I thought was interesting is sort of how you can create concepts that can then be duplicated and flex to work within certain communities. So is that something that your work has been lending itself to in terms of trying to help some of these communities create some rules for their police?
Yeah. So again, we've kind of done this front-end accountability work, which is, I've mentioned, is half of our work. And the other half, as we're going to talk about, is really making sure you just don't have the police there. Just to be clear, again, the first gathering we ever had of the Policing Project with police there, one police chief said, look, people don't want to see policing happen. It's just violent by nature. This is a chief saying that's what we do. We use force and coercion to make things happen. And so that is what policing looks like. And we've really worked at every level of government to try to gain some control. We've had a lot of communications with the federal government around President Biden's executive order on policing. We write statutes largely for the state level, but we've also worked at the local levels, whether it was trying to help Tampa or Tucson set up community advisory boards, or our biggest project is in Chicago. We run a project called the Neighborhood Policing Initiative, which is first, we worked with grassroots activists to get an ordinance passed to create a community commission for public safety and accountability, which is incredible. And then that commission just forwarded to the new mayor in Chicago 3 names from which to select a superintendent. But the Neighborhood Policing Initiative is us working really at the district level, like precincts in some places, to try to get the community and the police together to figure out what they want policing to look like. And so, yes, we have worked everywhere to do this. I do think that the best, bang for our buck and the most important thing is to get statutes enacted. That seems to me to be the primary thing that one should care about. And we've been very fortunate. Arnold Ventures has been very supportive of our work in this way. We're real close partners with them.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Certainly getting those in place could go a really long way. And I think it's important for people to recognize sort of the communal aspect and making policing work the way that it's supposed to and truly be a public service. Honestly, I didn't really think about this previously, but, I have a 3-year-old and, he watches the occasional kid show, whatever. He's really into cars. So he watches stuff with cars in it. And, there's police cars, and he's been like, there'd be songs about police in it. And I'm just, at what point in his life is he going to learn how complicated this is when right now, he's like, the police are stopping the bad guys. I'm like, well, I don't really want to dig in too deep with you at age 3, but I am starting to think about our future conversations.
I think about this as well. I mean, my kids grew up around me as I went on this journey, and they've had a range of views. They're very social justice oriented, and yet my daughter actually went to FBI Young Leadership uh, at Quantico one summer. Uh, and I think we all hold complicated views, but it's a complicated subject. The problem is it's way more fraught and complicated in this society than it ever should be. And I think it's because we have this complete lack of thought that we ought to regulate policing, and it has gotten, just literally out of control. I mean, that's the point of my book. It's literally not controlled in any way, and that's tragic.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, in terms of the how it got so out of control, I mean, a lot of my takeaway was the culture surrounding policing and surrounding crime, and how the police effort should be come above all else, and how you've shown that even when it's been made clear that there should be some sort of punishment or otherwise in a certain scenario, they often don't happen because it wasn't clear at the outset.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, people get really angry that the system of accountability of individual officers doesn't work, but you know, you can't punish your kid from stealing the cookies from the cookie jar unless you've made it clear that they're not supposed to do that. Like, that's basic due process. And all we've relied on in this country is the Constitution, which, has very few words about exactly what the police are supposed to do. But, people got it in their heads, the police got it in their heads, society got it in their heads that, that's what's going to govern policing. And that's ridiculous. Nothing, I mean, police are big bureaucratic organizations, and they need guidelines and rules. And, one of the fascinating I mean, there's a fascinating part of this and a tragic part. The tragic part is the immense amount of harm that have happened that just didn't need to happen. The fascinating part of this is, the police have sort of gotten convinced that it's in their best interest to be left alone. And that's just a mistake. And I actually think that we've gotten to know a lot of police who've come to understand the value of front end accountability, which is just requiring society to come to grips with what it wants the rules to be around policing. I mean, one of the things I try to stress in the book is, I'm going to point at you, is that each of us is responsible for what happens in policing, just like we are for everything in government. And it's our job to make sure that it's happening in a way that we want. So when you watch these videos and you watch the things that happen, and, if you're appalled, it's like, well, do something about it. Tell your representatives that you want some rules. We all do better with rules. I don't know. You may have libertarian tendencies. I kind of have libertarian tendencies. But libertarian tendencies aside, we all do better with some basic ground rules so that we can get along together and avoid harm.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think what you were saying in terms of everyone has responsibility in it is so important to take away. We can't just leave it to the police or leave it to the courts. We have a responsibility as citizens of the country. And I think it's a difficult thing to try to get those parties to work together, but it's what is necessary. And I know sort of in the wrap up of the book, you mentioned like people have that tendency to want to just say, oh, they'll just figure it out. Like the police will figure it out or the courts will figure it out. But really, we all need to take a stand.
I can't say that more strongly, that I really just think we all do have to take responsibility, and we have to decide what we think the rules should be. To go back to SWAT, I mean, I just don't understand the idea that you don't have written down rules that the public has bought into about when you're going to send a militarized force into somebody's house. It seems like the most basic thing.
I think your general citizen would assume there are rules around that, and it sounds like there are not many there. So let's say you're a practical, everyday citizen listening to this show now, very interested in trying to help get policing on a better path. Practically, what can you do to help with that?
I think there are a few things that you can do to help with that. You can certainly support us, but that we always welcome that. But the main things are to be tuned in, to watch, to pay attention, and then to really let your representatives know when you think there should be rules, when you hear about something's happening. Like, I think that the things would be dramatically different if representatives at the state level or federal level, but especially the state level, got phone calls regularly about things that have happened and saying, do we have rules about that? Like, that's it. Do we have rules about that? Maybe we should have some rules about that. And then they just, we write statutes. They're on our website, and other people have model statutes. And then the idea is like, let's get some rules. I really believe to my core, and I have good friends who are police and good friends who are abolitionists, and so it's all very complicated. But the world would look dramatically different if we had codes of conduct that say what it is we expect out of the police. There'd still be
And hold them
violations.
accountable
Yeah, well,
to
yes,
those
but
codes.
it would be easier, right?
It certainly would be. And I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing and so many others are doing to try to put us in that direction. And there's certain to always be a lot of pushback from other sides and people who have sort of some mixed hopes, I guess is the word, different things that they're incentivized by, but hopefully the will of the people wins out. So, we've dug in a bit about Unwarranted and what your book focused on, and that sort of half of what your work is at the Policing Project. And certainly something that has fascinated me a lot over the last few years, especially, is learning about alternative responses to policing. So it'd be great to get an understanding of your organization's perspective and what you do in that space.
So let me tell a story. So, we're doing our front end accountability work, and that involves me spending a lot of time in communities that are impacted by policing, a lot of meetings and, chairs in community rooms, and a lot of time in police cars, a lot of time in police headquarters. And the police really progressive police like to be talked about in terms of public safety as opposed to law enforcement. They like to think that their job's broader than enforcing the law. And I would watch and I'd think, I don't see a lot of public safety going on here. Like I see harm happening in lots of places, and I see people call 911 and their problems don't necessarily get solved. Like a cop shows up and, taking nothing away from cops, because it's interesting, the Los Angeles Police Protective League itself just sent a proposal to city council to remove 28 different kinds of calls for service that they get from their hands. And the story that they're telling is right, which is nobody trained us to do this stuff. We're trained to use force and to enforce the law. And so for a lot of other things you're asking us to do, dealing with mental health issues, which is certainly one of the prominent things, but, traffic accidents. You ever think about this? You ever had a fender bender?
Yes.
Okay. You sit there, you wait for the cop to come. The cop takes forever writing a report. Who's that cop working for? Do you know who that cop's working for?
The jurisdiction?
No, they're working for the insurance company. Because the insurance company wants a report. The jurisdiction doesn't care if your fender bender has a report. They couldn't care less. The insurance company wants one. And so it's like, why are we taxpayers paying to get reports for the insurance company? Especially because either the insurance company could get them themselves, or you could do it online. I mean, there's all kinds of alternatives to that. Here's another one for you. Burglar alarms. Burglar alarm goes off, the cop comes. Who's the cop working for?
Alarm company.
Exactly. See how quickly you catch on? Right? So it's like, wow, why doesn't the alarm company have little cars that drive around figuring out? I mean, most of those alarms are false alarms, right? And besides, if you've got a house and the alarm's going off, I would hope that whoever broke in has had the brains to get the hell out of there by then. And so it's like, the cops showing up to take a report, take pictures, broken window. So many things cops do, we don't train them to do, or we don't need them. They're also incredibly expensive cops. They cost a lot of money to have a cop on the street. So wellness checks. Here's another one. A lot of times people call up and they say, I haven't seen Jeff in a while. I'm a little worried about him. Could somebody go check? I mean, do you need a cop to go knock on the door and see if Jeff's still okay? No, right? You probably need like a health worker of some sort. So I saw this and I got fascinated by it. And I wrote this article with this really, really sexy title, Disaggregating the Policing Function. I'm good with the title. But you get the idea. The idea was like, let's take apart what cops do and figure out who needs to do it and who'd be better.
And I would say that your vernacular is more useful than defunding, because defunding just has this stigma around it and this connotation around it, when the reality is we need to separate these services into the right places and the right people?
I've thought about so the work we do is to try to promote alternative responders when we don't need the police. And I have thought about it in terms of, juxtaposed with defunding because, some people say like, I want to get rid of the police, and we could talk about that. I'd be happy to talk about that. But I would say, I kind of view myself as kind of just like a piece of salami, just cutting off the piece that doesn't make any sense for the police to do. And but I never really thought of juxtaposing defund and disaggregate. That's kind of interesting. Thank you.
I know Stand Together and MIT had a sort of a startup accelerator type of program they did called Unbundle Policing. And, a big thing that my feedback to them was it makes so much more sense from a marketing perspective than quote defunding, because it's not like someone's going in and just slashing the budget. They're really moving some columns to somewhere else so that, we can be funding mental health providers, or we can be funding hopefully via the insurance companies, people that go and take traffic reports and things like that.
Yep. No, I mean, look, this is, and what's interesting, Jeff? Until George Floyd was murdered, we couldn't get any funders to listen to us about this work. And it was just, anyway, I go on about that. But then after George Floyd was murdered, this light bulb kind of went off for the country about, mental health and why are the police responding to mental health. But that's super important. Like that is an area where we just absolutely need to have alternative response. But the truth is, we've been having conversations with cities about helping them move aggressively in this direction, because I have this dream, which we call the moonshot, about. So here's the problem that's going to happen. Let's say we get big in alternative response, which I hope we do. And we think most jurisdictions could slice 20% of their calls having other responders. I actually think we maybe could do better than that. And then what happens is, okay, so now you've got your mental health responders, you've got your accident responders, you've got your wellness check people. Next thing you know, you've got like 8 different kinds of responders. That's going to get super complicated and confusing, especially if you think about dispatch, like the people that get the calls and have to send somebody out. So my vision and our vision is what we call the moonshot, is a holistic response. I have this dream that one day there's going to be cars driving around the city that say on them, first. They're first responders. And their motto is, we're here to help. And those don't have to be cops. They shouldn't be cops. And I actually think that we're working on creating a career track so that people from impacted communities actually can come in as apprentices and get degrees part-time while they're working on the street. And I just have this hope that one day we've moved in this area where actually cars are driving around the city helping people. Because when they call, people don't call the police. We always say that, but they don't call the police. They call 911 because we gave them that number. We send the police. The question is, why are we doing that?
Yeah. I mean, what a beautiful vision that is. I mean, we would certainly be a better society for it. I mean, that group, I can envision having this foundation of important things that they'll need to know. And then they bring in the particular experts that they need, and they have access to those individuals. And yeah, I mean, it's a really nice thing to think about. I think that it will take us a lot to get there, but I think that there are incentives for all parties involved to get to that place. The police would like their jobs to be simplified.
Yeah, this is a win-win-win. I'll just, first of all, the holistic response idea that I have is that we don't even have a bunch of different experts, because we've sent people through 2 or 4 year programs where they get the range of skills. So my analogy is emergency room doctors. So, you go to the emergency room and there's a special doctor whose specialty is emergency medicine. But what does that mean? Well, mostly what they do is they, stabilize your situation. They fix it if they can. And if not, then you go see a specialist, like for aftercare. And so why isn't first response like that, where somebody's trained to deal with a whole range of things, and then we can direct you to city services where you need to? And that's what I would love to see happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great analogy with the emergency room doctor. And you could see that level of public employee, really helping sort of direct traffic in a way, and very, very likely, de-escalate some situations before they get to some of these extremes.
Yeah. I mean, that's, the problem is, so here's the thing that actually you may or may not ever have thought of, but I'm really huge into, which is I think the area where we need to train responders the most is on mediation skills. So if you ride around in a cop car, what you find is that cops spend a lot of their day like just mediating disputes, right? People that are just have beefs about things. They can't work it out. Noise complaints, fight in a bar, whatever it is. And you can get mediation services in most places, but they're like walk-in mediation. They're not mobile mediation units. But Dayton, Ohio, I should tell you, we just had this crazy convening in Washington, D.C. with 30 jurisdictions were there to talk about alternative response. It was like a magic moment.
Glad to hear that's happening.
I think this is the future. But Dayton started this mobile mediation response unit, MRU, and that's what they do. And I think that's just so amazing, right? To have people out there helping people resolve their disputes. And so, anyway, it's just part of the bigger story.
And it's great to see some cities and jurisdictions starting to take on some of these new ways of dealing with issues and trying to set the example for the rest of the country. So I know here in Denver, we have the STAR program, Support Team Assisted Response. Denver is another one of these cities that's trying to determine the best way to handle these scenarios and attempting to set an example. And just for my own curiosity, being here in Denver, do you have any experience with that program?
STAR is the first program that we went in to evaluate and help with. And STAR's, our report on Denver and STAR, it will be coming out probably within the month. But we've, it's interesting. So the first phase of our research was really research. And now we're really focused on helping jurisdictions and working with them. But at first we were just like going in to learn and give them feedback as we saw it. And Denver was the first place that we dug in and rode around with the responders and interviewed both. We did a set of interviews for public officials, dispatchers, police, mayor's office, and we did a whole nother set of interviews with community members to see what it was they wanted and what they wanted to have happen. And Denver's a program with just STAR with a ton of promise. It really is. And hopefully we've been able to offer them some important suggestions.
Yeah, I'm sure that you have. I'm so glad to hear that you guys are part of that, and certainly something I'm trying to keep an eye on here as a citizen. And hopefully we'll be one of the many examples to be set.
Yep.
Overall, in terms of policing, there's a lot of work to do. Front end accountability is important. Alternative response is really important. I encourage people here to read Unwarranted as well, your next book as it comes out. There are just so many things that the average citizen isn't thinking about when it comes to policing. And, I really learned a lot there, and just how much it can affect a random life on a random day and change it forever.
Yeah,
and I just think,
sorry to interrupt you, but police have this saying that's really interesting. They say that they're usually interacting with people in their worst moment, and that's really something to hold in your head, which is that this is people's worst moment. And you hope when you're having your worst moment that there's somebody there who can really help.
Yeah, exactly. So through these many years working on constitutional law, whether it be via Supreme Court or policing or otherwise, was there ever a time where you really saw directly how much your work could affect change?
So, well, I'll tell you a perverse story about the courts, and then there's a bunch of stories. I just mention a few in policing. So the courts, I was kind of an observer, and I was writing this book about how the courts aren't really unaccountable to the public. They actually tend to follow public opinion. And the weird thing I noticed, which I wrote about in the last chapter of the book, was at first when I started to say this, and there were just like two or three other people, mostly in political science, who were saying it, people scoff at us. Like, of course the courts aren't accountable. And then if you just go watch the media now around the Supreme Court, you just watch how many people are talking about how the Supreme Court follows public opinion, as though they're supposed to, which is not what I ever said. Like, I never said, oh, they should just do an opinion poll and decide the case. So I clearly am part of a group of people who had some effect on the gestalt about how we think about courts. In policing, certainly the gestalt around front-end accountability, but much more interested in actually affecting change that affects people's lives. And we've so one of the statutes we wrote is about pretextual traffic stops, the kind of thing that got Tyree Nichols murdered in Memphis. And San Francisco recently adopted our approach in the city. We worked with the Los Angeles Police Commission to figure out when to release body camera footage after the police have killed somebody. They adopted that, and it's now the law in the state of California. Baltimore had a surveillance plane that it was using to surveil the whole city in an attempt to bring down homicides, but it was deeply troubling in terms of how it's working or not being regulated. And we did an audit of that, and that program was actually shut down, not as a direct result of our audit, but we had some role in that. I could go on. There's just all kinds of the alternative response work. Is I really hope that we're helping spark a movement here. It seems just so incredibly important to me that this field develop. So there's a lot of areas in policing where day to day, Chicago, the Community Commission on Public Safety and Accountability was a grassroots effort, but we were very, very lucky to be asked to be their draftspeople. And so there's a lot of areas in policing where I hope having daily impact.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear about some of the particular impact that you guys have had in day-to-day practices. And before we sort of transition into some of these more macro questions, I just want to emphasize to the audience that there's just so much depth to the work that you're doing, and we've really barely scratched the surface. So anyone out there that it's really interested in this should certainly check out the Policing Project, your books and otherwise, because there's just so much to learn in this space.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm very, very grateful to you saying that. I'll mention, obviously we have our website, policingproject.org, but there's another website, safetyreimagined.org, that is all about alternative response. But I appreciate your kind words. They mean a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you've had a fascinating career, and it's been incredible to see what you've been able to build at NYU. Throughout these years, has there been anyone particular or any people in particular that have been an impactful mentor for you?
That's a very interesting question. I co-run this program to mentor young folks young lawyers who want to become legal academics. And I spend a lot of time mentoring. I actually just spent a lot of my life mentoring people. And I guess that's because I'm old, but partly it's because I didn't have a lot of mentoring when I was young. And I made some truly bizarre decisions. And they've worked out okay, but I wish that I'd had more help along the way. And I have had mentors, one of whom is a really amazing lawyer, two of them who passed away, one just during the pandemic. But I think mentoring matters a lot in everybody's lives. And I just, if I hadn't thought to say this, and I know you do a lot of this kind of thing in your own life, but just engaging with people who need help and direction is a really, really important thing to do. We sort of assume people know everything they're supposed to know, like you just head off into life fully formed and aware, and it's just not the case. And so I think it's always great to be able to share, whatever wisdom you have for whoever wants to listen.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. And I think there is knowledge that a lot of people just have in themselves that they can share with others, and they don't realize some of those people, it's going to completely change their life. And there might be a conversation you had 10 years ago that you didn't think twice about that someone is still sort of living by today.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there's certainly things that in my own life where I tell stories about, something somebody told me that turned out to be hugely consequential. Maybe at the time I didn't even realize it, but over time I did. So,
well, if you'd like, you're welcome to ask me a question.
Well, I'd love to ask you a question because it really relates to the work we're doing with alternative response. So, you're no slouch yourself when it comes to giving back and philanthropy and caring about people. And one of your big social change issues has been cannabis reform. And I think that's just been so unbelievably important because we just wrecked so many lives over this, blatant stupidity. But it's not been easy. And, like gay marriage, actually, it's one of those things in my lifetime where you just never would have guessed it was going to happen. I mean, I still have trouble wrapping my head around the fact that I can walk into a dispensary and get marijuana because, it was like, it was illegal and it was a big problem. And I know you've been deeply involved, and I think through your commercial and philanthropic ventures, you've thought a lot about narrative change. And I'm interested to hear from you. I'm sure others are interested to hear from you, whatever you've thought about in terms of, how we change a narrative that may seem so ingrained in society and so impossible to change, and yet, you've been involved in actually accomplishing it. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the kind words. Certainly, many narratives that need to be changed in our society around drug policy, around criminal justice. I'd say that cannabis is certainly has been a good step in the right direction. There's still lives getting ruined by old, poor cannabis policies, but yes, we've made big steps. And I think similar to some of the other subjects that you've mentioned, part of it is just creating empathy within society to the human elements of these situations. I mean, one, that the cannabis plant isn't the demon that it was often painted to be, but also just that people that quote use drugs are not bad people. They're Cannabis for me has been a really impactful, helpful part of my life, whether it be for anxiety or focus or otherwise. But in general, I think as cannabis is becoming legal in certain places, people that weren't open minded about it start to be, or they start to see it in front of their eyes that, hey, the sky doesn't fall when we do this. And so I think that pushes things in the right direction. But I think that honestly, most importantly, is the criminal justice sort of mess that's resulted from the disproportionate enforcement of drug laws and, especially cannabis laws. But there's such a disproportionate number of people of color that are in jail for these things. It's certainly not equal to the percentage that of demographics that it's used by. And so I think really bringing the human element to that that's what like got me really interested in this is, first I was joining the industry as I saw cannabis kind of coming up, and I was realizing that it wasn't the demon it was painted to be growing up in South Carolina, started to do research. And as I met people and went places and did research, I started like really learning about the atrocities of the war on drugs, and just myself as like, a free American citizen, and just thinking of being in some of these people's shoes and losing their life, losing their kids, losing their livelihoods, whatever it might be, because of what amounts to herbal medicine, is really horrifying. And to think that the color of your skin makes that much more likely to happen to you is just, I just was really disgusted by it. And from early on in my time in the cannabis industry, saw that it was imperative to be involved in ending the war on drugs if you wanted to ever make a dollar off of this space, because there are still today people in jail for this plant. And that opened me up to all of the other efforts in drug policy, whether it be psychedelics, whether it be the opioid epidemic. And there's a lot of complexity to it. And, when you just throw the ideas to people on the surface, maybe some of it seems a little crazy, but when you really dig into the human element of all of this, and, not punishing people if they're not hurting other people, it really resonates. And I think that it has effects. It touches so many different areas of our culture, and of our lives. And so, I guess that's a long way of saying that through the efforts of a lot of different people, the suffering of a variety of individuals, we're starting to change the narrative. And it's been a really hard wall to break through, and there's still a lot of breaking to be done. I mean, these walls have been built for centuries, and with kind of Richard Nixon putting in some of the toughest bricks, and we are starting to get past that. And I certainly am not going to rest until we truly believe that the war on drugs has ended. And I'm not sure that will happen in my lifetime, but hopefully it's something I can inspire people to continue.
So I have another question for you, if I may. And I really, yeah, I thought of writing a book about the war on drugs, but they've been written. But and it's had this profound effect on me, like how insane it was that we've just shredded our liberties and caused so much pain and trouble. Um, but you also work in the entertainment sphere, and one of the really interesting things that happened at we had this convening in DC, we in Georgetown's Center for Innovation and Community Safety, and it was incredible. it was so incredible that everybody at the convening sat in their chairs the entire 2 days and like came back from coffee breaks and weren't on their phones, like because it was you could just see this is a field that was taking off. And in the middle of it all, Quentin Williams, who works at the Joyce Foundation, they had commissioned some research from Lake Research about people's views about alternative response. And what you find is across like every demographic, people are really interested in it and they really think that it's got hope. But you could also see in the polling data that people couldn't picture it. Like they could for some things because they'd heard about it, but for most of it, they just couldn't. They're used to seeing a cop show up at the door. And so we got to talk about how to socialize the idea, including people saying, like, because you were talking about your kid watching these, shows with police cars in them. It's like, how do we get Hollywood, assuming that Hollywood comes back, to start showing us alternative responders? To start, so I'm just curious about your reactions about how the entertainment business can help drive positive narrative change.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I'm really passionate about. Entertainment, creating positive social impact. Producer friend of mine, Scott Budnick, I originally heard him talking about it and saying how after working for many years as a Hollywood producer, he wanted to focus on criminal justice reform. And when he got deeply engaged in that, he met someone that had been a big proponent of marriage equality. And one of the ways they said they made that happen was by weaving in these types of stories into, content, into media, whether that was relationship in Modern Family or shows like Will and Grace, and how it truly, but slowly but surely softens people. And so I love that concept in general, certainly something for me in criminal justice, and mixing it in with my work in entertainment is, trying to show the real life stories of people that have gone through the system or trying to reintegrate into society. And in terms of the first responder type teams that you mentioned, I think there's a huge opportunity in entertainment if the right people get on board. There's a lot of popular shows like Chicago Fire about the fire department, and shows about hospitals. And so why not make one about one of these first responder teams that's in a trial market and see the kinds of things that they're going through. And of course you're going to see some hard things, you're going to see some tough things, but ideally something like that, and even more ideally happening in multiple film productions and otherwise, I think can go a really long way in helping people picture it.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about that. I spent part of December in San Francisco riding around with their street response unit, and I'm used to going on calls with the police all the time, and their response unit goes through fires, so you could actually get confused. You're in a car and there's a radio and there's a dispatcher, and it seems like, and then you go on the calls and you just see what they're doing, and their response is just incredibly compassionate, and they have time to figure things out and to help people. And I'm a guy that's tears up easily, but I was really on the verge a few times that day, and so I'd love to talk some more about that, because I think it really socializing this with people so that they come to expect that this is the way that society responds to people in need would be really profound.
Yeah, agreed. I think that both through unscripted production, like through reality shows or documentaries about these people actually doing this work, and then accompanied by narratives that really dig people into the characters and the stories, because I think that's important to really connect with the human element of these things.
Yep, I agree. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the very insightful questions. I appreciate it. Would love to dig deeper into those topics with you in the future. And aside from family, that's usually the standard answer. But if everything were to end tomorrow, whatever that means to you, what are you most grateful for or most proud of?
Side family, uh, which I am incredibly grateful for. It's ridiculous how I married kind of late in life. I actually been married twice. I had kids my second marriage, and I just really cherish it every day. But I feel really lucky to have gotten to do this work. That may seem maudlin or ridiculous, but and don't get me wrong, it's full of pains in the keister that you just wish you didn't have to deal with, and not what you think is your highest and best use. But at some level, I feel like if you can help people, if you can have a vision for positive change in society, if you can play whatever small role you play in that, and see the needle move a little bit, that just has always felt to me really rewarding. And I'll tell you a story that merges the two, which is definitely maudlin. But one Father's Day, my kids wrote me cards, and they said, we get it. Like, sometimes you're away when we'd like to have you here because you're off doing what you do. But we wanted you to know that we're just incredibly proud of the work that you do and think that it's inspiring. And I just melt me right there.
I can only imagine. So,
Yes, you have a 3-year-old. It will take a little bit more time.
Well, I'm also really glad that you've been able to do this work. And, for sort of the last big picture question I like to ask everybody, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be? And how do you think that change would reverberate?
It would be to fix the violence around policing and make our response to people in need more compassionate. And I'll tell you how it will affect the world. It's not a mystery to me. There are too many neighborhoods in this country that are just not safe. And clearance rates are abysmal for really serious violent crime. But it's because we've sundered the trust between people who are supposedly responsible for achieving safety and the communities. And the truth is, it's the communities themselves that need to create safety with the help of the government. That's what they say. Like, when you go ask community members, they don't think it's government's job to keep them safe. They think it's their job working with government. And, you and I were together at a Stand Together event, and I was very touched by all the incredible work being done around rising people up economically and educational opportunity and healthcare. But I got something to tell you and anybody who will listen to me. You can't have any of that without public safety. And you can't have public safety without communities working together with government to achieve it in a harmonious way. And so if I could fix the violence around the way we try to help people, which is ridiculous, just like the cannabis policy is ridiculous. And if we could get government and communities to work together to keep themselves safe, that's the beginning of a road to growth and prosperity and well-being for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that we are on that path despite all of the hurdles in the way. We're moving in the right direction. Your work's a big part of that. Certainly appreciate it. People listening, like your children, are very likely inspired. How can they support you and your impact?
Well, that's easy. And one of the things you have to learn to do when you run a not-for-profit is ask people for money. And I have learned to do that. I'd never done it before starting the Policing Project. But if you go to policingproject.org, there's a donate button. It's a little annoying because it goes in through the university. You have to follow little procedures there. But we welcome that sort of thing. And certainly anybody who's a serious donor and would like to talk about it, we'd be glad to do that, because that's what keeps us going. And we started with a staff of 2 and some administrative support. We're closer to 30 now, and everybody's working hard all the time. And I'm super proud of the work that they do, and that is how to help us.
Awesome. And I'm sure that's the places to go as well if people are looking to keep up with your work.
Absolutely. We need to upgrade our website. That's on our agenda. I guess that's on everybody's agenda all the time. But the Safety Reimagined, or there's another one, 30 by 30 initiative, which is to try to increase the number of women in policing to 30%, recruits to 30% by 2030. So those 3 websites are where you can sort of see what we're doing.
Great. Well, I will make sure to include all those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me. Always really love talking to you, and look forward to continuing our conversation and sharing these messages with the world.
I feel the same way, Jeff. I think it was some of that fortuity that I was talking about earlier that we met one another, and I've really enjoyed this, and now we got to get together in person.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with friends, and reviews or subscriptions on your favorite platforms go a long way to help the show grow. I want to share these incredible people and their remarkable work with as many others as possible. Thanks for your support. For more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.